everybody. Hi. Happy New Year. Welcome to the first in our series for 2018 of Insights, and we are very happy to kick off the year with what I would call our power couple. One of our new couple residents here and up on the 25th floor, and we're very happy to have them. You might have one of the longest times from the time you signed up to the time you moved in, right? Or do you have the record?
2013.
2013, okay.
They were my first waitlisters.
Oh, right. Well, they're going to tell you their story because they know a lot more about it than I do. Please welcome Ricky and Karl Newkirk.
Well, I've been chosen to go first, so...
I don't remember that.
But anyway, thank you so much, everyone, for being here. Thank you so much, Becky, for inviting us, although my nerves this morning were not thanking you.
Oh, we're a friendly crowd.
Of course. And obviously, we really appreciate you all giving up your lunch time to be here, to come and hear our story. It's obviously, I have two lives. Karl probably has three, before we met each other. So my upbringing was very simple. I was born in the traditional northern town in Cheshire, the county of Cheshire. And it's a very pretty county. It's in the northwest of England. It's full of Elizabethan type buildings in a traditional northern town called Macclesfield. And if any of you want to look through these books afterwards, you're very welcome to. I was born 18 months after the Second World War, and my parents had met each other on a blind date. My father came from the London area, and my mother was a Macclesfield girl, as we're called. And her friend said, look, I'm going on this date, I don't want to go alone, please go to friend, come with me. That's how they met, and hence I arrived afterwards. They got married and I arrived. Of course, it was after the war, things were really difficult, there was no money, nobody had any money. Things were destitute in England. There was severe rationing, and my parents had no money and they had nowhere to live. So they went to live with my mother's grandparents, and they lived in a little cottage, exactly like this one, that was called a 2 up and 2 down. And that's literally what it was. There were 2 rooms up and 2 rooms down, usually the bedrooms and then a kitchen living room. No bathroom, running water in the kitchen. And so we shared an outhouse with 7 other families, and we had a bathtub literally hanging on a nail on the wall outside the door. And on Sunday nights it was bath time. And my poor mother had to heat the water on this fire, a traditional Victorian fire that had the roll-in, roll-out little fender. And she would fill the bathtub. And I was the oldest one, so I had the first bath. I was always very glad I didn't get the last bath. And so washing was done the same way in a tub with the old possum and the ringer. So life for my mother, especially who worked, was very, very hard, and especially living with her grandparents. But they managed, they were very glad to have a home. Everyone was in the same position. So when my grandparents decided to move to an older community, they left my parents in the home alone. And then my second sister was born. And then when my third sister was coming along, she's 6 years younger than me, they decided they needed more space. Why? They never thought that before, I have no idea. But they did, and they moved to a council home. And a council home is an estate where the council build the houses. They were beautiful, they were new, we had a garden, and my mother must have thought she'd gone to heaven. And we lived there for several years until my parents could afford their own home. And they eventually bought this home. It had no central heating. You had to put then shillings in the gas meter for the gas fire to come on. But it was our home. My bedroom must have been built on at some time because I had to walk through the bathroom to get to my bedroom. And it had no electricity, so I went to bed with a candle every night. And I thought, being the romantic, I thought this was really cool. My father was a firefighter, and he just used to panic every night and make sure that I had snuffed the candle out before I went to sleep. As I say, my father was in the RAF until the end of the war. He was in the medical corps. And then he joined the fire service, the fire brigade. He was a firefighter. And my mother worked in a factory. But they were very hardworking, they were loving parents. I never went without anything, as difficult as times were. And as I said, we were all the same, so we never felt that we were different. My mother especially insisted that when we moved into our own home, there was the beautiful church opposite where we lived. It was called St. Paul's. And she said, right girls, you're old enough now, you must go off to church. My middle sister was only 14 months younger than me, so we almost felt like twins. And we really did have our life around our church. And we had a very strong youth group, and we attended that, and we used to go on midnight hikes with the youth fellowship leaders, and we'd go through our beautiful countryside in Cheshire, and we'd camp out in the barns, and we'd light a fire, and we'd make our breakfast before we went on for the rest of the walk. And we would walk all night and sleep all Sunday after we'd, of course, been to church. And it was there that I became very interested in the youth leadership. And a way in to explore that was to become a teacher in the Wolf Cub pack. And that's the junior section of the Boy Scouts. And in England, they're called Wolf Cubs. And so I became a Wolf Cub leader. And of course, I wasn't old enough to become Arkayla, the pack leader. So they gave me the name Rikki Tikki Taeva, the mongoose. And Karl will attest to you that it's very much my character, the mongoose. A
emphasize that.
a fiery, feisty little thing when it's cornered. So I taught Wolf Cubs and really enjoyed it for many, many years. And I would see these little boys progress, and I worked with them to get all their different badges. And my mother was an absolute saint because she worked through them with their housekeeping and baking and cooking. And her kitchen on Saturday mornings used to look like an army had been through it. And then I'd say, bye Mom, we've got to do so-and-so. And sadly she'd be left to clean it up, but she was a saint. So the other person that had a big impact in my life was my grandmother, my Nana. She was a very powerful lady. She was tall and stately, and she again was very hardworking. And she taught me so many things. And she created my love of music. She created my love of dance. She taught me how to cook, and she certainly taught me to appreciate flowers and gardening. And to this day, I love all those things. And I feel my grandmother is on my shoulder every day. She's been my guardian angel. She's guided me through so many difficulties in my life. And I just love her to death. I love my mother, but my grandmother was so special. And I was born on my grandfather's birthday, and I was his first grandchild. So there was a very special relationship between the two of us. I would love to go to their house because, as I say, it was always full of the most beautiful, delicious smells. And Duke Ellington and Count Basie and Dinah Washington playing on the radio or on the gramophone. And my grandmother would push the furniture back, and she would grab hold of me and she'd twirl me around the floor, and she actually taught me to dance. So I left school at 15. I didn't have a choice. My father became to go to college. In those days in England, working class people did not go to college unless you had a sponsor, unless you were very, very clever. And I was not. I loved English, I loved English literature, I loved science, and I loved history. So I went to what they call a secondary modern school, which is a more practical school, and I learned typing and cooking and sewing and all the practicalities of life, which is really more my character. I am not an academic. So after school, as I say, I left school at 15. After school, I went to work in a small, very, very small office in the town. And I was basically the junior dog's body. Tea, all right. File this, okay. Run this errand, okay. There were only 2 people that worked in the office. And then the boss said to me one day, there's a beauty pageant going on, and we want you to be our representative for this area. I said, really? And they said yes. So I got somewhat cajoled into it. And in the end, I did win the nomination for that area and found myself 6 months later down in London with 20 other girls. And I had my picture taken. It was in the national papers. And after being at that one and only beauty pageant, I said, this is not for me, never again. So that was the end of that. So I then decided I needed to be in a much bigger office, and I went to work for a very large company, perhaps the largest company in the town. And I started off as a junior typist, and then I worked myself up to the secretary of the after-sales manager. I was his assistant, and I loved all my bosses, but Mr. Knowles was particularly kind to me. He was very much a father figure. And he saw that I was restless. I have a free spirit, and he saw I was restless, and I used to go up into the hills above the town, and I would look down, and the birds were flying on the thermals around me, and I used to think, oh, if only I could do that. I had to flap my wings. This is a wonderful place to live, but I had to get out of this town. And he understood that. We never spoke about it, but he understood that. And one of my friends, her brother worked for British Airways, and he was based in Manchester, and I happened to be having dinner with her one night and her parents. And her brother came in, and I was mesmerized. He looked so handsome, he got this gorgeous uniform on, and I started to ask him questions. And I realized what a great way to see the world, being a flight attendant. And so the next day, I wrote to British Airways. Of course, there was no such thing as computers or internet and anything. And I wrote to British Airways for an application form, and it came back and it said, where would you like to be based, Manchester or London? And I ticked the London box. And after I'd sent it off, I thought, oh my goodness, what have you done? And then I thought, have the courage of your convictions. Where is your strength? And so I got it. Weeks later, I got back a request to go down to London for an interview. And after 3 or 4 interviews, I was eventually offered the position of a flight attendant. Well, flying in those days, it's not like flying in the cattle trucks that we have today. It's very sophisticated. The training process was very intense. And there was a lot of people, in actual fact, on my training course that dropped out because they could not stand the pressure, because after all, the flight attendant's job is really to safeguard you in the event of any emergency, not to feed you food. That's to keep you all quiet. So these are the days. I found this photograph. So these were the elegant days when I was flying. Can you believe that?
Wow.
Right. And it really was. It was a lovely job, and I saw so many parts of the world and got paid for it, and I just adored it. And then one day, sadly, there was a crash. And I was supposed to be on the plane that crashed. And I had been taken off the flight at the last minute and sent somewhere else. And when I got to Paris, there was a quietness around the cabin crew, and we arrived back at Heathrow. And that's when the captain told us that the plane that I was supposed to be on had crashed and there were no survivors.
Oh.
And it was 3 weeks before I was getting married to my first husband. He also worked for British Airways. So he had just wanted to start his own business. And he said, look, this is the time for us both to leave. And I did. I was very reluctant to leave, but I did. And so he started his business. I went to work as a secretary in the nearest big town. I would see the planes stacking to come down. And I used to look up and think, where have they been? I know exactly what they're doing. About a year later, after my marriage, I announced I was pregnant with my first son. And I worked until I was 8.5 months pregnant, and then I became a stay-at-home mother. 3 years after Nick was born, I had James. And I was a stay-at-home mother all the time in England, and I loved being a mother. It was my greatest joy. And I had 2 dogs and 1 cat, and I was very involved in their school. And then one day when they were a little older, I thought, I want to do something for myself. So I went to an aerobics class, and I was hooked. And so in the end, about a year later, after going to all these aerobics classes, I took some qualifications, and I went to work for a studio. And I became an aerobics teacher. And so that was my life until one day my husband, my first husband, said to me, we're going to America for a holiday. Are we okay? No, am I running?
You just have to watch.
Oh, thank you. I'm only 40 through my life.
I was aware of that.
So anyway,
When do I come in? When do I come in?
So anyway, where was I? Oh yes, my first husband decided that we were going to go to America for a holiday. And we went to the East Coast of Florida. And then he said, oh, I think I want to live there. And I was like, what? I don't think so. You know, I'm an English girl. I don't want to live in America. Anyway, in 1985 we did. We emigrated, we sold everything in England. And so I really do appreciate how an immigrant feels. How frightening it is to be in another country when you really don't own anything. We didn't even own a set of keys. And the different cultures. Being from England, I thought that I would really fit into the American culture very quickly. It's vastly different, and we think we talk the same language, but we do not. So that's how I came to America initially. Within a few months of living here, we bought a hotel in Siesta Key, and Lisa Soroki and her family and I go back a long way. Her brother was my first son's best friend. I knew Lisa's parents, and her father was the builder that completely renovated and rebuilt this hotel for us. So to see Lisa here in the halls when I was walking through one day was such a surprise and a great joy to reconnect with her again. We stayed in that hotel for about 10 years, and then we realized we were banging our fists against the ceiling, as they say, and we needed to expand. And so we bought another hotel down in Port Charlotte. It was a Holiday Inn, so it was 100 rooms. It had a restaurant and a bar, something we'd never run before. But again, we ran with it, and we did very well. Sadly, in 2004, Hurricane Charlie came and blew the thing away. During that period, my husband and I had divorced, although we still worked together, had an amicable relationship. But after we lost Charlie, it was time, I said, that I would retire. And I wanted a quieter life. And I was very involved with the 2 grandchildren that I had at the time. So between family and my 2 grandchildren, I thought, enough. Well, then I met Karl.
I am in this. I
met Karl, and my quiet life completely went away. That was the last I saw of it, because living with Karl is a fun and happy time. But boy, you feel like some days you're living with a hurricane. He's the most gorgeous. He is. Gorgeous, gorgeous man. He's very kind and loving and kind-spirited, and just adores his family and grandchildren. And really, I can't say enough about him, and I'm just so happy to be married to him. So after 2 years, 18 months, sorry, no, 1 year. 1 year, after 1 year of courting, he asked me to be engaged. And he took me on this magical mystery tour. He picked me up in a Daimler, and he was in a tux, and I thought, where are we going? And so we went on this magical mystery tour, and we eventually ended up at the Par Design, the John Ringling Mansion. And we wound our way, the docents were waiting at the front, and we found ourselves going through the house and up the stairs outside to the Belvedere Tower. And it was beautifully set up. And during that evening, he proposed to me. And I said yes, of course. And he immediately got up and he went to the wall of the Belvedere Tower and he went, "She said yes!" And friends apparently on Lombok, he said they were waiting for it, they heard. So a year later, we were planning our wedding. And we decided we were going on a cruise. And then from there, we were going to stop off at the Tuno, at the Mental Hole Glacier. And that's where we got married. And these are the photographs of our wedding up there. And we had the traditional cake and champagne and lilies, and we danced. And the song that we danced to was called At Last. And that is the theme of our discussion today. But it was by Etta James, a wonderful original black singer who I love Etta James. I love her throaty voice. So, as I say, we've had a wild ride. For me, I've had a very, very happy marriage with Karl. It keeps me on my toes. We have 7 children between us. We have 20 grandchildren, and we have 2.5 greats. So, the last quarter of our life is now here at Plymouth Harbour. I have to say I was reluctant, first of all, to come. Karl was ready to come here before me. But during that transition period before we moved in, I made so many friends here, and I saw the vibrancy and the friendliness of the place. So when I moved in, I felt that I'd already lived here for almost 2 years. And it was an easy transition. And so I tell so many people outside, you really do not think of it as a retirement community. It's a wonderful living experience living here. And I can't tell people that enough. And it's a very compassionate place. It's friendly, vibrant, and compassionate. And so at last I feel that in the last quarter of my life, I am at my complete place with my deep best friend and soulmate. And I thank you all for listening to me, and I apologize that I've taken so long. I haven't talked so much.
You're wonderful. Now, in summary, I'm not saying before I get the hook here.
No, go for it. Just go for it.
It's fascinating to listen to that story because if I would title my comments, I would call it Lucky, Lucky, and Lucky. Born in America, yes, we participated in the war too, but we certainly didn't get bombed and so forth and so on as European friends and English friends did. So I grew up in 1941 happily in Cuyahoga Falls, Ohio, suburb of Akron, Ohio, at one time the rubber capital of the world, but things changed in that regard. Middle class life, off to college, did well in high school, off to college. I thought it was just going to be an extension of high school. Guess what? When I got to college and I was studying engineering, everybody else was smarter than I was, and everybody else had more high school science and math than I had. So I learned one thing. In order to survive there, I had to work hard. I had to work harder than anybody else, but that learning process did me in good stead the rest of my career. One more comment I'll make is then when I graduated from college and industrial engineering, and I was talking to a lot of companies because the economy was good. A lot of companies wanted to hire people coming out of technical schools like that. Case Institute of Technology in Cleveland, to be specific. And they all wanted to give me a great job in some manufacturing facility that they had. And I got on an airplane for the first time in my life and flew around and saw all these manufacturing facilities. And I kept asking one question: Do I come to work here every day, and is my desk going to be right next to people that I saw yesterday? Because their desk is right there, and my desk is right there. And they said, oh, yes, yes, you'll know where to go and you'll know the people. And I kept thinking, I don't want to do that. I want to get a job where I can move from environment to environment and see and meet other types of people, other types of companies. I don't want to be in the same company every day for ever how long. And then along came an accounting firm interviewing for engineers. Because they couldn't find enough accountants, I guess. Are there any accountants in the room? Yeah. I'm in trouble. And I asked one question, really. They said, we want to hire you and we'll make you an accountant, don't worry about it. And I said, will I be at the same desk every day? Same old question. They said, oh, absolutely not. You will go out on this audit to this client, and maybe 3 months later you'll be at that client, different business, you know. I said, sold. You know, and they, by the way, they didn't pay so good. But that decision changed my trajectory in life. So I got into becoming a CPA, but quickly got bored with auditing other people's work, and that's really what the big accounting firms do. But to my great fortune, Arthur Anderson, the company I went with, had decided to get into helping their clients with some of their computer problems, because the computer, as used in business in the 1960s, was a brand new thing. And companies didn't know how to make it run. They couldn't even get their payroll to run right, inventory, things that we take for granted. And so Anderson, to my great fortune, allowed me to go into that business of helping companies with their business information systems / computer problems in the 60s. And we all know that trajectory. Couldn't have had a faster growing thing in this country. 40 years of smaller but faster computers and spreading out on your desk table. Now it's right here. Oh, sorry.
No, you're fine.
Now there's your computer right there. And I was very lucky, again that word, to ride that fast-moving ship. And 40 years later, I looked up and said, geez, it must be time to retire. I'd grown, my second wife and I had grown apart while I traveled the world. And so she agreed she'd stay in Cleveland, and I said, I'm going to Florida the day after retire. I'm tired of cold weather. And most people come to Florida to get warm weather and sunshine and all this. But I had another objective, much more important objective. I was on the search for a wife. And boy, oh boy, did I get lucky, and that's my third lucky. And I won't say any more, because many of you know Ricky. I'm just lucky that the first time I found her. By the way, since I didn't know her name, it took me 1.5 years of looking on Friday night in the bars, where that was before the internet, right? But when I saw her, I knew her, that was the one. That one. Now, she didn't react well to mine. So it was a long and arduous process, but we got it done. And then the last memory I have, I think, to complete was up there on that glacier, which obviously had to reach by helicopter. They flew us up, and a small group of people that took care of everything. And then the helicopter left, and I turned to her and I said, I got you now, babes, you're not getting off. So I knew she was going to say yes. So I found my winner. And here we are, because I'm a planner. I'm always looking ahead and saying what we're doing. So I wanted to identify this last step in our life, and we couldn't have picked a better place. And the facility is great, but what's really great are you folks, every one of you, and those that aren't here, and your attitude towards the residents. You're caring. We feel that every day, and we love it. And the second thing that's, or the third thing that's great here maybe, is the other residents. Hey, there's some pretty nifty people here. And we feel very blessed to be a part of those nifty people that live here. End of comments.
Wow. Exactly 12:30. You are a planner.
No, I just worked with what I had. I got more.
Hopefully, most of you can stay a little bit longer, and so we can do some question and answer, and I'm sure, this is the accounting end.
Oh, I gathered that when I started talking about it.
But anyway, open it up for questions.
Yeah, I do. First of all,
Does he get to ask
I went to my directory, and now I understand, Ricky, your email address, Ricky Ticky Tiva. Now it all makes sense. But I think you should go one step further in explaining the iceberg or the glacier, because I can remember passing by that picture one day and saying, that's interesting. It looks like the two of you are completely alone on an iceberg. And as I recall, it was something like, well, there were a couple more people, the helicopter pilot, the photographer, and that was about
Well,
it.
they left. There were 2 helicopters because of the amount of people. There were we didn't know anybody else, but there were 9 other people. And so there was a wedding planner, and she also was a JP, so she married us. There was her assistant. There was a videographer, a photographer. There were 2 glacier bunnies. They are the girls that pop off the helicopters. The helicopter comes down but hovers them up, over the glacier. And they hop off and they run around to make sure it's a safe place for the helicopters to actually come down. And they get the thumbs up or the thumbs down, and then they hop back on. And this happened to us a couple of times before they were happy that the helicopters could come down. So there were 2 glacier bunnies. And then there was a lady from National Geographic who happened to know our planner. And she was doing an assignment for National Geographic and about life on a glacier. And she called her editor and said, look, there's weddings going up here. You know, can I do a segment on her? She said, sure. And so we'd asked Wood remind if she came with us. So we had to have 2 helicopters because of the amount of people that were with us. And instead of one.
I can add to that. I'm not big on big weddings with lots of guests, so 0 was the number of friends and family that we invited.
And they all came, all 0.
And I gave her 2 choices. I said, we can either get married in Bora Bora or some remote place like that, or we can get married on a glacier, because I don't think anybody else will try to come.
Well, we had a celebration in England in September, and then, in the August, and then in September we had an American celebration for all our family and friends here. So he didn't get away with it entirely.
Yeah, I've had the privilege of getting to know Karl and Ricky very well over the last few years. And the other thing that I find fascinating is, and talk about planners, or people that have their eye on a goal. The first time I walked in your home, you wanted to show me something, and if you recall, when you opened the door, you said, just step in a minute. You walk in, beautiful, beautiful home. But you walked in the living room, and of course, you know, all the doors, the windows, doors are open, so it's open to the outside, and they just pointed out over the bay and said, that's our goal.
Yes.
Yeah,
And in the middle of that is Plymouth Harbor.
Yeah.
And I think was a little more detailed, and I said, see those windows? I'm not fussy or picky or anything, just give me those windows.
And what does your grandchild call your home?
He calls it, well, he thinks we own the hotel.
Yeah.
He calls it a house in the town, at the top of the town.
In the sky? Oh.
In the sky,
That's
that's
what
right,
it says.
in the sky, the house in the sky. But he's convinced that we own the whole.
That's why they they make me go greet them and open their car door when they're there.
On Tuesdays.
But it's funny you say about Karl with his planning. We would take our grandchildren kayaking, you know, the mangroves at the back, and we would always be kayaking at the back of Plymouth Harbour. And one day, before I even knew, he said to some of them, he said, "You see that?" He said, that's where Ricky and I are going to live when we get old." I'm like, "What?" Every time we passed, they would say, "That's where you're going to live, Grandpa, isn't it?" And he'd say, "Yes." And I soon got on board.
But I had to say no to the heliport.
Oh, it can come up again.
Well,
Yeah, I guess my question would be, you said you were leaving Ohio, you had to get out of the cold weather, I'm going to Florida, and you wound up in Sarasota?
See if I can answer that in a minute. I had to spend a lot of time down in Florida. As a kid growing up, we never came down here. But I knew that the West Coast was where the really good people were, and the East Coast, well, they got Mar-a-Lago and that stuff. So I knew it was the West Coast. I had a realtor friend up there, and I said, well, I'm an analytical guy, so I'm going to take 2 years, and I'm going to scout every city, starting in Tampa, St. Pete, all the way down to Naples. And then I'll analyze it and do it again next year and so forth. She said, that's fine, that's great. But I want you to start in Longboat Key. So I said, okay, I'll get a place there and I'll start looking around based out of Longboat Key. And then I ran into one of these fast-talking lady realtors that we have here in Sarasota. And 3 days later, I bought a house, so I was locked. But again, being a good planner, I'd already deduced. Again, my goal was to find a mature woman, as they would say, that there was good stock of mature women in Sarasota. Bad does that sound? But we got her, right? And that's why I came to Sarasota. She wasn't down in
She
Naples.
was whistling.
She was here.
The strange thing was, though, I had my home on the Palmer Ranch, and when I met him, and he was on Longboat, and he said, "Well, you're going to come and live at Longboat, aren't you?" And I said, "No." "You're going to come and love our Palmer Ranch." And he said, "No." And so, you better close your door, Reverend Sparrow, please, because he said to me, "Well, will you come and live with me for 6 months and see if you like Longboat?" So I thought, you know, I wouldn't jump into marriage again anyway without really knowing the person. And so I did. I still have my home on the Palmer Ranch, and I used to go visit it every week and water my orchids and say hello, little house, and goodbye, little house. When I said, and that we lived on Longboat for about 6 months, and I realized as beautiful a place it was. It was very unsociable, and it just wasn't my sort of place. And so we decided we would find a house halfway between the two. And we found something on the mainland in Sarasota. And Karl had the idea that we were going to just live in it, just with a few alterations.
That's what you do with a house, right?
Yeah. And when we found out it had a lot more wrong with it than we originally envisioned, so we ended up tearing it down and started from scratch and rebuilt our custom home, which Harry was talking about. But we always knew this was, or Karl always knew, as I say, that this was his own.
We lived there 10 years.
Yes, we lived there nearly 10 years. So, and it was the right time. And I'm so glad that he has that vision, that, you know, that we came here, because it is the right place to be.
you know, we could say this so much about so many of our residents, and it certainly includes the Newkirks, and I mean this sincerely, and I know what I'm talking about. You know, the day these folks said they were going to be residents here, Plymouth Harbor even became a better place.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Appreciate that comment. We hope we can live up to Harry's experience.
Well, so far you have, so
Yeah.
thank you very much.